You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
This is Stephen Cabral. Today we have our second house call of the weekend. So we've got some more great questions that came in. Looking forward to getting into those. And the first one, which I'm going to start with, is actually one from Dan. And Dan is asking, so it's a little bit different than we usually get. So Dan wrote, I get the bulk of my protein from food. However, I do supplement with whey protein from anywhere to 15 to 30 grams a few times a week. Would essential amino acid powder be a better choice? There seems to be a lot of benefits such as no caloric load. They are pre-digested, so there's little chance for GI distress, and they offer less nitrogen waste, so more is utilized by the body. If a replacement of one for the other is not ideal, would alternating between the two in some fashion be a good choice? Okay, so basically Dan's question boils down to, should he use whey protein or an amino acid formula to reach his goal? So Dan, I'm going to assume that your goal is bodybuilding or putting on some type of muscle, right? Because you don't need to really worry about getting more protein in your diet if you're supplementing, right? So like, if you're using a whey protein, a lot of that's because you want to increase muscle mass or the from exercise. I might be wrong with your question, but I just have to read into it a little bit because I have to be able to answer it. So essentially, when we're looking at amino acids in the body, we're looking at essential amino acids. Essential amino acids means that these specific 9 amino acids, the body can't make on its own, right? So the main ones looked at in bodybuilding, really, putting on muscle, are leucine, isoleucine, and valine, okay? Those are very, very important, and they'll come up in a second. There's 6 others in the body that can be made under the right conditions, and then there's 5 more that our bodies can make on their own. So really what we're talking about are essential amino acids that our body has to get. Now, the interesting thing is that a study was actually done on your exact question. So meaning like, should you use whey protein or should you use essential amino acids? So let's go over it. The study actually showed that both the group that used the essential amino acids and the whey protein got a boost in a measured anabolic effect, which means the ability to basically increase muscle mass and strength. While the non-essential amino acids, meaning like the group that you took in non-essential amino acids, which means the body doesn't really need them because it can make its own, they saw no improvement. So it's a very good study because it did actually show 3 different groups of people and the results that they got. Well, here's what they found, is that consuming 15 grams of whey protein actually outperformed the essential amino acid powder. So they said the results for that are unknown, why that happened, but we can really tell you why it happens, and that's because this. Whey protein has been known for a long time to also increase IGF-1 and a lot of other anabolic-based factors. So it's also a kapha-based food or endomorph-based food, meaning it helps put mass on the body. So when we look at that, we can say that a actual food-based is always going to be a little bit more potent than maybe just pulling out these certain amino acids. But the other thing is that whey protein can actually have a insulin-like effect. Okay, that means it can help to get absorbed at also a faster rate, which also could help the uptake of those amino acids in the first place. And the reason we're believing this as well is because they did another study. And when they did the study, they showed that when you consume these amino acids, whether from whey protein or a liquid drink, meaning the essential amino acids, if you mix it with carbohydrates, you get an even greater anabolic effect. So I think, I know this was a kind of a technical question, everyone, but hopefully the big takeaway is this, is that when using whey protein will always give you more of an anabolic effect than it will consuming individual or just the individual essential amino acids or an overall amino acid formula. Now, taking amino acids on an empty stomach does show to be anabolic and also preserve muscle mass, which is why a lot of people use the branched chain amino acids before a workout to preserve muscle. So, Dave, you can kind of look at it both ways, but what I would say is if you like using whey protein, use a grass-fed based whey, use a clean one, hormone-free, and you use basically just the cleaner whey protein that you'll get more of the benefit from and more of the anabolic effect from. So hopefully that answers your question. The next one is kind of a follow-up, and it's from Moon. She wrote in, I did a keto-based show last, I think it was probably 2 weeks ago now. It was episode 179. It said, be careful of keto diets. And she wrote in, I think maybe a little upset or maybe just questioning, saying that I need to look more into keto-based diets and the research and a few specific doctors and the work that they've done. And so I always take suggestions, and I'm happy to take criticism as well. I have no problem with that. But Moon, I do want you to know is that I've looked very in depth into keto-based diets. And the reason I wanted to present it on the show is because a keto-based diet is great for certain segments of the population. So it can be great for those people who potentially have a tumorous-based cancerous growth. It can be good in the short term, not long term, but short term for people with weight loss issues. It can be good for certain inflammatory conditions, but not all. So this was a blanket statement. Basically, Moon said that a keto-based diet is anti-inflammatory because not her saying it, she read it somewhere else. And yes, it is anti-inflammatory for some people, but not everyone. Hopefully, we know by now that there is not one diet for every person. We've learned this now over 10,000 years from Ayurvedic medicine, 3,000 years ago from traditional Chinese medicine, Greek medicine, like literally everyone. Only we as modern day people think that there's an all for one for everyone. It's not. And the reason is this, and Moon, there are studies right now that show a keto diet is anti-inflammatory. And there are studies that also show a keto-based diet is inflammatory. There are studies that show a keto-based diet lowers LDL levels, like LDL cholesterol and triglycerides. And there are studies that show keto-based diets that are higher in fat increase LDL levels. So what is it? Does it decrease it or increase it? Well, it depends on the person, as I've always said in the past. And I do much deeper looks into each individual person. There is no all-for-one based plan. And when you look at people's genetics, which I do high-end genetic testing all the time, and anyone can do it. You literally go to our store and you purchase the genetic test. You spit into a little tube and you get a 100-page report on your body. And it will tell you the percentage of carbs, fats, and proteins that do best for your body in the long term, long run. Now, there's a specific segment of the population. They have what's called an ApoE4 genotype. Now, these people, they can have a 4-2, a 4-3, or a 4-4. The 4-2 is basically 2% of the population. The 4-3 is about 18% of the population have this, and about 5% of the population has the 4-4. Now, the 4-4, a high-fat diet for them would be like a ticking time bomb. So let's not make these wild accusations, whether you have a PhD or whether you're a doctor or whether you're a guru, whatever it is. Please do a service to everyone and say that this diet is not for everyone in the world. Because if you put someone who has a 4-4 on a high-fat diet, you're going to make them more prone to a lot of different types of brain-based diseases, inflammatory diseases, because anyone with that 4 in front of their basically genotype is not able to break down saturated fats as well as others. That means they stay in the bloodstream longer. That means they create more inflammation. And if we add up the 2, the 18, and the 5%, we get about 25% of the population. So maybe a keto diet can be very beneficial for 75% of the population, but I can tell you for sure it's not good for 25% of the population. So what I'd like to say is I respect everyone's opinion, and while someone might get radically phenomenal based results, and while 75% of the people might benefit in the short term, especially on a keto-based diet, and yes, that could sway the results from a lot of studies, there are also studies showing that keto can be inflammatory. And just think about some of the foods that you might be eating on an inflammatory diet, and you can look at them and they're specifically inflammatory themselves. So I'm going to talk about this more on my Motivation Mindset show tomorrow, so please do tune in for that. But don't get so committed to one thing that you can't be open to change. Don't get so committed to one thing that you only see the research from certain studies that back up your viewpoint, right? I mean, let's be a little bit more open to understand that not everything is perfect, right? And not every researcher is perfect. And sometimes a researcher makes this their life's work, and they don't include some of the other things that might not point it in the greatest light possible. So if we come from the get-go as this doesn't have to be the right thing for everyone, then I think we'll all be a lot better off. All right. Hopefully that wasn't too harsh, and I just wanted to give you a different vantage point to look at. That's all. All right. And it's my opinion. You can take it for what it's worth, but the research is legitimate. So Alicia is asking, last question, we're going to lighten things up a little bit. Alicia's asking, we know you love to read books. We were wondering, do you read mostly standing up or sitting down or both? Just wondering, what is the ideal reading position as to not tire out the back, neck, or shoulders? Okay. So Alicia also asked a question on chaga tea and holy basil tea. Alicia, hopefully you saw, actually I didn't even see your question before that we actually did an episode on Friday, on our Friday review, episode 188, that talked about the benefits of chaga tea. So definitely check that out. And holy basil is absolutely fantastic as well. So just a quick tip there. Absolutely. Holy basil is absolutely fantastic. Longevity, adaptogen, really, really great. All right, so let's get to the question. How do I read? Well, 90% of the time I am reading sitting down. And I'm not in a slouched position, meaning like I'm not just kind of like lounging. I'm still trying to use good posture, which means that I'm trying not to read with my shoulders slunched forward or my head really slunched forward, because I work with so many people with these biomechanical issues where like their chin just sits so far in front of their shoulders that they get all this tension in their trapezius muscles, which are the muscles above the shoulders, and in their neck. So I'm pretty conscious about keeping my head back or maybe rested on something and then just obviously reading the book. But I'm also in a comfortable position. I'm not trying to tighten up my body. Really, really important as well. I'm also not a big advocate of standing desks, which I'm going to get into in the future. And it's not that I don't like them, because I stand a lot during the day. It's that I don't like the body to be standing in one position where it can then lock out the knees or lock out the back. So now if you're using good standing position, then great. You're not locking out your joints. You're not allowing blood to pool in the legs, which is not good for you at all either. And you're not swaying your back. So all of those things are really, really important. And if you could do even something better, it would be have like a walking desk, like a treadmill, where you're just walking very, very slowly and lightly and doing your work at that. That would be kind of like ideal, right? But obviously that's not going to happen for most of us, and it doesn't happen for me. So, one thing, again, standing desk can be fantastic. I don't want to sway anyone away from it, but I just want to watch out for the blood pooling, the knees locking out, the hips swaying, because that can lead to poor posture as well. So what I try to do is I just try to get up and walk more. Like, I always talk about my afternoon or my lunchtime walks, where I always go out for an hour or so to walk. And I walk to work and I walk back from work. So again, I get my walking in. If I'm working with a training client, I'll be standing, of course. So I do most of my reading seated. And again, if most of your job is seated, then you might want to do yours just walking very lightly. And that's the biggest thing, is looking at balance, right? So if I'm standing a lot for the day, I easily do 10 to 13,000 steps minimum per day. It's okay for me, I think, to sit down a little bit and read. It's also more relaxing. I love reading. And so a big thing for me is I like to be in a little, like a relaxed environment. A lot of times I'll get out of my office, I'll go to a cafe or whatever it might be, and I'll sit down there. Or, I'll go some other place. I mean, ideally, if I can be outside, I try to just sit outside and I try to read as well. For me, it's one thing is I want to get in my reading, so I do it in a place that I'll enjoy it. I want to give you that same advice. Read in an environment that's going to allow you to read more. If you fall asleep when you're seated, then you might want to do it standing. And if you don't walk a lot, then there's nothing wrong with doing a little bit of walking and reading, obviously in a safe place. And believe me, I actually do walk and read, but I make sure that I'm in obviously a safer environment where I can be walking and not... I live in the city and I work in the city, so I can't be in the environment where I might, walk off into the street or walk into other people walking down the street. So, Alicia, hopefully that answers your question. Gave you a little bit about standing desks, give you a little bit about, an insight into how I read, and that's how I can concentrate the best. So, hopefully that answers your question. And again, be sure to tune into tomorrow's episode. Really enjoying this one about talking about how really you are not your diet, you are not your workout, you are not your disease, you are not all these things that you get fixated on. So I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow. It's such an important base topic. But once again, I really do appreciate you for tuning into the Cabral Concept. And again, if any of these answers can help any friends, family, or coworkers, please do feel free to share the show with them. Thanks again. Did you know that the body really only becomes sick or imbalanced in only two ways? Over time, you become deficient in vital nutrients, and you also accumulate toxins internally and from the environment. As those nutrients diminish and you increase your total toxic load, your body then begins to show the first signs of dis-ease. It's actually quite predictable, and the good news is that if we know how you began to fill up that proverbial rain barrel, we also know how to empty it to begin the healing process. I was fortunate enough to learn this ancient healing process from my mentor after suffering from debilitating diseases for close to a decade. It was only when I began to implement these techniques did I finally overcome my illnesses and go on to live a life of energy and vitality that I now enjoy. I'd like to share with you now what I discovered after traveling all over the world and how to combine the best of ancient healing wisdom with state-of-the-art science. Allow me to teach you exactly how I've been able to help over 250,000 people to empty their rain barrel and begin to transform their body and lives into what they've always hoped they could be. To get your copy of the international bestseller, The Rain Barrel Effect, simply go to stephencabral.com/rainbarrel.